Well, a very special guest on the Smyrna podcast, Mr. Terry Stavridis, a historian, an author, a teacher, and your background is really studying Anatolia. It's been a life work of yours. Why don't you tell the audience about your life work and why it's important to remember what happened in Anatolia or Smyrna, particularly over 100 years ago?
Well, I started out in history, writing academic history, which with footnotes and a lot of hard yard trying to find this bit of information, that bit of information to fill the gap. But I found that writing academic history or even academic history books, there's not really a very big market nowadays. I think people today are not really interested in history as it was in the past. Then I decided to dabble in historical fiction. And so I started thinking and saying, well, how can I write something historically fiction wise? So I said, well, you've built up a body of knowledge on Anatolia, Asia Minor, or modern day Turkey. Why don't you use that vast knowledge and combine it with fictional characters and create a series of short stories? And that's how my book, uh, Tales from the Last Days of Anatolia, was born. Uh, the book is not a novel, or it's really a collection of little short stories of about 1,500 to 2,000 words. Now, each story is based on a fictional character who witnesses conflict, deportations, massacres, being a refugee, ending up in a refugee camp in Greece, and some who were more luckier ended up coming to the United States. So I also put the American connection there as well, because as we know, a lot of besides the million plus refugees from Asia Minor, a percentage of them also ended up in the United States. Now, during the 1920s, the United States had closed its doors to immigration, and then they instituted from 1924 onwards the immigration quota, and that was based on the census of 1910. And of course, if a refugee had a relative in the United States, it was a lot easier for that person from Greece, or from even from other parts of the world, to come into the United States. But the thing is that the quota system was that, say for argument's sake, in from Greece, you were allowed to bring in, say, 100 Greeks per year. If you were 101 or whatever above that, well, tough luck. You'd have to wait your turn maybe the following year or a couple of years down the track. And that's how they came to America. Now, if you had no one, forget it. You would have found it extremely difficult to enter the country. And of course, the entry point was Ellis Island. And when they came through there, they were interviewed, they were medically checked, and if everything was okay, welcome to the United States. And I'm just going from memory now. I've been to New York only once, and that was to attend an academic conference back in May 2015. At that time, I was living in the United States, and I did see Ellis Island from a distance, going down this ramp, going to CUNY, there on Fifth Avenue, and I did see also the Statue of Liberty as well. But I do intend to come back to the US and visit these wonderful historical landmarks in the land of Uncle Sam. And yes, so after that, I decided that how can I put these stories all together? So I started making up fictional characters. Now, I made up one fictional character.
Now, when you say fictional, you're not talking like creating a Batman or a Superman or anything like that.
Yeah,
This
like that. Yeah. So I created a guy called Harry Malvani. And you're wondering who the hell is Harry Malvani? Well, Harry Malvani is the fictional George Horton. And
from the U.S. Council in Smyrna
yeah. So,
during the Great Fire.
yep. I changed his name from George Horton. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I get into trouble, coming up with things that may offend people. So you can create, uh, doesn't Hollywood put pepper and salt into what they term, films based on historical fact or based on some factual event? They
Little
change the dynamics of it.
little
So I
poetic
said,
license,
well,
little poetic license.
bravo, spot on there. And so I decided to create this Harry Mulvaney, and in the book I think there's about eight or nine parts to him because I thought it was good to do a series of little short stories on Harry Mulvaney. There's also another lady in there whose name escapes me, but she escaped from Pontos. She ended up on the Eastern Mediterranean, and then she caught one of the refugee ships, and they did like island hopping until they finally arrived in Athens. She lived in a refugee tent in Athens, and then eventually she was able to. She was a seamstress as well, apparently, and so she was able to make money sewing clothes, and then she bought her house. Then eventually she had two children. She brought two children with her, and the punchline, what that was, it was her faith in the Virgin Mary that kept her going uh, on that. But the reason why I wrote historical fiction, Michael, was that people's attention span is very limited today.
Yes.
People people want to get the facts within a matter of seconds, and to sit down and write a book of 300 or 400 pages with footnotes and bibliographies and index and all that table of contents would not many people would buy a book like that. So I decided to create little short stories with these fictional characters and bring to life some of the events of that period to life. So people need to know that, like I see in the background there, you've got Smyrna, paradise is burning. Well, that is correct because we know that in September 1922, after the ejection of the Greek army from Asia Minor and the entry of the Camellus, basically at the start in an orderly manner in the city, then telling the inhabitants, "You've got nothing to worry." Well, we know what happened within a couple of days. The city was torched, and hundreds of thousands of refugees from the interior and from Smyrna were trying to get out of the place. And
When
the and the,
Yeah, when I was doing my research for the documentary and reading the butchering that went on as people gathered in the quay, they had nowhere to go. They had the choice of either jumping in the water or be burned alive or hacked to death. That's what these people were facing. And you're talking about a lot of the population came from the hilly area, the well-to-do area. Your character that you mentioned before might have never picked up a needle and thread in her life because was very well to do and was forced to suddenly become, say a servant or something when they eventually got to Athens and to America. It's no exaggeration of the suffering that went on by the Greeks, the Armenians, the Assyrians, and
yeah,
22 that this isn't a fairy tale,
no,
despite the Turkish government thinking that denying the severity of this, well, them saying it's a war, basically.
Well, what really one thing that I'd like to share with you also, Michael, on this podcast is what was the inspiration that besides, sharing my knowledge in fictional form, the original idea was actually born watching the movie The Promise. I don't know if you ever saw that,
I did.
dealing with the Armenian genocide, starring Christian Bale and Charlotte Le Bon. And it's a fictional story of an American journalist who witnesses the Armenian genocide. And and the funny thing is, I saw that movie about 7 years ago, around this time, with my wife. With my wife, we actually sat down in this picture theater, and we were the only two people watching it on that night in that session. There was no one else. It was like as if we had our own private screening
Yeah,
of it.
it's sad because I don't think the general public here in America doesn't have much interest in it. I don't know about Australia, but I remember going to see the movie Cliffs of Freedom, which is a story about Greece and Greeks and Turkey, and I believe it was a late, about right before the freedom, about 1800s or so like that.
Yeah.
There was five or six people in the theater. There wasn't anybody there to see it.
Well, the thing is, it's the same thing here in Australia. Look, let me give you an example here from the local scene. I'm sure you're aware that Australians, commemorate Anzac Day, which is April 25th. That's the day when the Australian New Zealand forces landed at Gallipoli to fight the Ottoman Turks in World War One, which
Okay.
was an absolute disaster
Yeah, it was Churchill's disaster.
militarily.
Churchill's disaster.
Yeah, well, Churchill should hang his head in shame. After that, he didn't last very long as First Lord of the Admiralty. Anyway, um, one of the things that I've been trying to change the narrative here is, Michael, there are two examples. Some people have laughed at me. Some people say it's irrelevant. I said, well, if you think it's irrelevant, then you are really ignorant. For example, 2 weeks before the Anzac landing on April 25th, 1915, there is a State Department document around August 1915 by Henry Morgenthau sent to the Secretary of State from Constantinople with an attachment from the Greek Patriarch in Constantinople, showing the number of Greeks that were deported from the Gallipoli Peninsula into Turkish villages and then whisked off to the interior of Asia Minor. Now, I need not tell you what happened to these people. I think we know what happened to them on the Labour battalions and so on. Now, a lot of people say, what's the relevance of that? Well, I said it had a lot to do because what the Turks were fearing was that this Greek population down there could have acted as a fifth column and helped the Allies identify, the Greeks could have helped the Allies identify Turkish positions, from that perspective. But and also that should be included in the Anzac story. No, it shouldn't. Okay, shouldn't be included. Now, and I said, if you want to give something more Australian, well, during the Anzac uh, disaster, there were Australian soldiers who were taken as POWs. Some of these POWs were taken into Asia Minor and were in turn as prisoners of war by the Ottomans. Now, some of these soldiers were fortunate enough to keep a diary of events, and some of them recorded witnessing deportees of Armenian men, women, and children. Now, some of these references or diaries are held in the Australian War Memorial in the Australian capital city of Canberra. And you're telling me that Australia has no interest? Look, we have tried. Uh, there are three state governments here that have have passed resolutions acknowledging the Greek, Armenian, the the Greek, Armenian, and Assyrian genocides. The state of Victoria, where which I live, last year we were supposed to uh, put up a motion in the state parliament in the upper house, and the then leader of the Greens proposed that they were going to back the resolution, but in the end, it fell through. Apparently, the Turkish lobby here in Melbourne is quite strong, and they are, from my understanding, they're quite a strong force within the Australian Labor Party, which is we have a state Labor premier. We also have a federal Labor government in Canberra as well, and there have been attempts in the past to raise, even at a national level, a genocide resolution on behalf of the Australian Parliament, and it always gets squashed. One brave Greek Labor politician, Member of Parliament, Steve Yorganas from South Australia, did make a speech on the genocide some years back in the federal Parliament, but it never carried. It never carried. So, and the thing is that the Turkish lobby here, how in New South Wales, that's Sydney, Adelaide, South Australia, and Hobart, Tasmania, the resolutions carried, I have no idea. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was good planning, I don't know. But at least those three jurisdictions have acknowledged, whereas our federal parliament drags its feet on this issue, because I think a lot has to do. Let me tell you, when the resolution passed in 2009 in South Australia, I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. And I wrote then to the Minister of Trade of Australia, Simon Crean, and I said, Mr. Crean, it's time the Australian Parliament recognised the genocide of Greeks, Assyrians, and Armenians. He wrote back to me and he said, that's not a job of the politicians. That's a job for historians. I said, really? I didn't respond back. It wasn't I'd be wasting my time. I did a search, and the two-way trade at that time between Australia and Turkey was worth over $1 billion Australian dollars.
Jesus.
So, and that's what it's all about. It's about trade. It's about economics, finance. That's what it's all about, Michael. Put
Well,
simply.
I mean, you look back, and again, over 100 years ago, Turks for Turkey was the cry. Mustafa
Yeah.
Kemal seized power I mean, Turkey at the time was called the sick man of Europe. It was
Yes.
on its decline, and it's just ironic that when the Greeks were moving inland after landing in 1919, that the Allies would actually undermine the Greeks with supplies and the train routes and everything like that. Because Greece would be a very different country today if they would have seized power for at least the west coast of Turkey.
Yeah.
So you're talking a much more powerful Greece we'd have today
Well, well,
than it is now.
that was Lloyd George's dream, a strong Greece in the Eastern Mediterranean to add that extra strength to British naval power in the Eastern Mediterranean and the approaches to the Suez Canal. And look, at that time we were lucky we had, probably in my mind, to this day, the greatest Greek Prime Minister, Eleftherios Venizelos. I'm not saying he was perfect. I mean, no human being, none of us are perfect, but he was the man that had the vision. I mean, Greece was a smaller country.
The Magali idea he had.
Yeah, the Megalia there. Five oceans, two continents. But I forget the Greek expression for that. But but of course, after we lost after the Liberals lost the election to the Royalists, and the plebiscite was held for the return of Constantine in December 1920. Well, that changed the whole dynamics, and that was really the beginning of the end for the Greek presence in Asia Minor. Britain sort of played a funny role. They were for us on one hand and against us on the other, to work in conjunction with their French and Italian allies. But the French and the Italians were straight out they supported Kemal because they had their own agenda, their own economic interest in Asia Minor. And the thing is that one of the things that we need always to consider with Asia Minor, after we attached to the Treaty of Sèvres, was the secret, what was known as the tripartite agreement, where the British, French, and the Italians created their own spheres of influence in Turkey. Where they would protect minority rights and exploit these regions for their own economic benefit. Look, economics played a very, very significant role in that. Now, I want to come back 180 degrees back to my book. One of the reasons, another influence of that book, Michael, was to try to point out that the problems in today's Middle East are not new. To understand the modern Middle East of today, or the Near East, people, you can use whatever terminology you wish. These issues go back to the secret treaties of World War One. I'm not going to go back to the time of Rome or Byzantium or anything like that, because that's another time period to examine. I'm not a specialist in those areas, but I confine myself to the last, say, 120, 150 years of European history of that region. We need to understand those secret treaties, how these great powers parceled out Ottoman territory for their own gratification at the end of the conflict. And of course, what changed, of course, was when the Bolsheviks won, kicked out the Tsar and had their revolution. And of course, they published, the secret treaties of World War One in the press. That changed a lot of the thinking. All the people say, "What? What we're doing this sort of thing?" Now, the other thing too is that I would like to find someone who is a good script writer to sit down with me and let's go through the book and say, what do you think? Is there a potential movie or even a short drama series on Netflix like that? And if he wants to, whoever that is, if they want to change a little bit the dynamics of the stories, that's fine. I'm very flexible. But the thing is, as long as you remain to the essence as to the true nature of the stories themselves, because I think, in my mind, that modern Greek history uh, does not get the publicity it deserves. I mean, we are a small country. You
Yeah.
know, Greece is a country of what, 10, 12 million, these days, and it inhabits a very volatile area of the planet. It's between east and west. If there's a war in the Middle East, God forbid, Greece may be dragged into it because of its next door neighbor.
Yeah. I always say that Greece took the brunt of the Turkish blow. If it wasn't for the Greeks, the Turks could have ran right in and taken over Italy easily and beyond when they wanted to. The Greeks got the worst of it during the height of the Ottoman Empire. Uh,
Oh yeah, oh
right.
yeah.
And
Um,
to your point, when people mention Greece, they think of Alexander the Great and Sparta, and we've got great diners here in the United States, and it ends there. But there's a part of Greece it's pretty integral and has been affected the last couple of hundred years.
well, I've also taken a recent interest. I've written a few articles. Are you familiar? Do you read the National Herald?
I do on occasion.
Okay, as you know, I'm the feature writer. I've basically have taken over from Steve Frangos, who
Wow.
was and I'm now, and I write from the other side of the planet. And the funny thing is that I liaise between
It's it's
Melbourne,
it's published in a
Athens, and New
story.
York.
It's published in a story, I think, still.
Yes, yes, yes. So, my editor is based in Athens, but my publisher is based in New York. So we've got sort of like an inverse triangle. Melbourne, Athens, New York, like that. It gets around like that. So there's,
Well,
in
that's the
fact,
largest Greek population. Athens, Australia, and the United States have the biggest Greek
yeah.
population.
Well, look, I can assure you of this, Michael. I'm better known in the US than what I am in my own backyard.
Hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why I want to return back to America. Look, when we were living in America, there were certain things that I had to come back here, and of course I wanted to return back. There were other issues behind the scenes which prevented me. But when I came back in March 2022, the first thing that he said to me, the immigration guy there in Los Angeles said to me, "You you're on our books." I said, "Really?" I said, "I thought that once your green card expires, you got to start the whole process again." "Oh, no, 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 no." He says, "When you return back to where you've come from, go to the nearest consulate or embassy and renew it." And then, of course, I got diagnosed with what I got diagnosed with. But now that I'm in the clear, I've started the process again. So like that. So so that's where we are. But I'd love to see one of my stories on the big screen and even on the little screen. Maybe the Harry Mulvaney story could be maybe the Greek lady. But the thing is, uh,
Maybe we start with the play.
yes, yes. Well, look, one of there's a guy there called Michael Vaziris, who actually is born in Smyrna, and he comes to America during, I think, during the war or something, and he finds it hard at the start, but he becomes a Greek American, and so on. I've even started a little novella about the same, not about Michael Vaziris, but someone else. But it's still in the too hard basket. I need to sit down one of these days and write it.
Do you gonna write a chapter on a little bit section about Asa Jennings, who the American the American priest that helped save all those lives in Smyrna in 1922?
I'm aware of him. I'm aware of him. I've never written anything about him, but I'm certainly aware. But look, the 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 one person. See, if there's one thing that I have done, which I've uncovered in my research, I was the first to uncover the a Japanese ship.
I was just going to bring that up because in the readings I did, Lou Yernick's book and the other books on Smyrna, there wasn't a mention of the Japanese ship that helped rescue those 250,000
Yeah,
people that were on the quay on the
yeah,
quay in Smyrna. I was just going
yeah.
to ask about that.
Well, I actually, when I came, look, I came to a genocide conference back at California State in Sacramento back in 2004, and I was the only. You had your usual Armenian genocide, and what happened in Yugoslavia and Bosnia and so forth, and the Holocaust. And one guy came up. I was actually asked by several people, and they said to me, "What, was there a Greek genocide?" I said, "You darn tootin' there was." And they said, "Well, where do you get this information from?" I said, "Well, of course, you can get it, in National Archives." But I said, I found it, believe it or not, in the State Department collections. Wow. And wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I was the only guy there, waving the Greek flag. And then of course someone told me something about a Japanese ship and saving like that. And I said, "Where did you hear this from?" He says, "Someone told me." They couldn't remember who that someone was. I said, "Okay." So when I came back to Melbourne from the US, I went down to the Bailey Library at Melbourne University, what I call the bargain basement. All the microfilm collections were there. Got the State Department collections out, on Turkey and look through frame by frame by frame. No, no record at all of a Japanese ship in the Bristol War Diaries. In the end, I said, well, let's look through the newspapers. And that's where I picked up a lot of these references. And then later on, I picked up that George Horton mentions in one of his dispatches of an unnamed Japanese freighter or whatever it was that saved X number of lives. And then later on, I got into the old Greek newspapers, in Athens, and that's where I picked up the name of the ship and the name of the captain. And and the funny thing is, when I did all this research, this is ongoing. It's still ongoing. I'm still waiting. I always put out every once in a while. Do you have any information, whether it's anecdotal or in written form, about this issue? Nothing. The only thing that I remember was back in 2018, I found an article, I think it was about 13 pages long, written by a Japanese scholar who teaches one of the universities there in Japan. And I think there were around 35 footnotes. She cited me 4 times in
Really?
her research. Yes. Even if you look at Ismini Lamb's book with her husband on George Horton's biography,
The
I get a mention there as well.
Yeah, but Horton's book, I know was Blight of Asia. That was one he wrote. So you
Yeah,
don't.
no, no. Well, they've done Ismini Lamb and her husband have done the official biography of George Horton.
Okay.
They were able to get access to his archive. Michael, I'll make a confession here publicly. Back in the late 1990s or early 2000s, I tried the then daughter, the she was living at the time, George Horton's surviving daughter, Nancy Horton, to get access to her father's archive, and she kept dilly-dallying around,
Oh no.
and it really, really,
He
I
he
was ready.
he kept immaculate notes from what I understand, and he tried to get as much as he could when the city was on fire, get whatever he could out of his home and get it on the shipping and get out of town.
Yeah. But anyway, I congratulate Ismini and her husband for doing what had to be done. But I have a lot of documents on George Horton through the State Department records, and of course, you can pick up other references. In fact, uh, uh, one area of research that I'm doing at the moment, and for the National Herald, I found 2 interviews conducted by a guy called Skouloudis for the Greek Athenian paper Patris in January 10 and 11, 1919. This guy was sent by his editor to Constantinople, or now known as Istanbul, to interview Rami Bey, that the
Oh, really?
governor.
Oh, wow.
Yes, yeah, the governor of Smyrna from 19 during the First World War. Now, I've translated the article from Greek to English. Of course, I'm not going to just put the translation as the article itself. I'm going to embellish it, with other sources to give it, a balance. I've also have found that a second interview that he did, and I'm going to be translating that in the coming days. It deals with Rami Bey's understanding of events at Ayvali during the First World War. So I've managed to find, I've dug widely to find information on Ayvali at that time. I finally found what I wanted, so I'll be able to embellish it from there.
In your estimation and your research and everything, Kemal, obviously, if you can't go anywhere in Turkey and not see a statue of Kemal, even in Cyprus, you go to the Turkish side of Cyprus, there's a statue of Mustafa Kemal. He's bigger than George Washington is here in the States. Do you think he could have did more to contain the fire in Smyrna, or you think it was beyond his control? by the time he came into the city.
Whether he was behind it or not, well, he was the leader. He must take responsibility for the actions of his underlings. Look, if you like Hitler, for example, right? You know, whether Hitler said anything for or against the Jewish population, but he is responsible for the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And like Kemal was responsible for what happened to the Greeks of Asia Minor. Yeah, besides the Young Turks. But look, if we look at it, say from our perspective, he's a villain. But from the Turks' perspective, he's their national hero. So, so you got to look at it that way. Look, I'm not saying either for or against. I look at as a historian, I try to the best of my ability to be as objective as possible, even though there are events that are very hurtful, Michael, very hurtful. And when you read eyewitness accounts of people being massacred, people being deported, starved to death, that would send chills.
I think that in the readings that I did, the killings, the rapings in the graveyard of ancestors, um, having young women dance and then be raped and cut their breasts off, incidents like that.
Mm.
It's beyond human, and it's just something that's beyond human to me. I don't understand, and maybe because I'm sitting here, I'm sitting behind a computer, and I'm not in a war. Um, but it's it's not understandable to me how a country can deny performing these acts. If you did something, here in the States, we've kind of admitted our wrong with the Indians and bringing the slaves over. This slow healing to that going on, but it's at least recognized. It's not recognized by the Turks. If you talk to a Turk, they don't want to talk about it. It's not being accepted to who they are.
Well, you only have a handful of Turks. There is one scholar that I know, Tanir out at UCLA. Yeah, he's a scholar that's the Armenians love him because he supports that, and that's the situation that we need to find, Michael. We need to find Turks who are with us because not all Turks look. There's good and bad in every race. Okay, if we put aside history and just look at human beings, you know, are all Greeks good? No. There's good people, in between people, and bad people. But the bad people are few in number. It's those few in number that stir the national emotions of the other. That the other's a vermin. It needs to be exterminated. And look, the one of the underlying messages of my fictional book, and even the articles that I write for the National Herald, is to understand that history is important because history is our guide, is our teacher. We need to learn from the past. We can't predict the future because historians are not in the business of being prophets. That's not our role. There are others who, there are people who put the term, futurologists. They can do that. But my role as a historian is not to predict the future. My problem, my raison d'etre is to explain the past in its own terms, not in the terms of 2025, but through the eyes of those that lived at that time. That's what history should be about. And hopefully we learn up where we are today that we heed those lessons of the past and try somehow not to repeat them. Because, the Middle East is a troubled area. It's been a troubled area from time immemorial, okay? Because it's the crossroad of East and West, of religion, politics, economics, the whole shebang. And the thing is that my book, the message is We need to heed the lessons of the past. And I want to see history become a much stronger subject at colleges and universities, because here in Australia, history is almost, you know, here we have this idea here in Australia. If you're a historian, ooh, you're a historian. Oh yeah, it's sort of like the tall poppy syndrome. So if
What?
you, well, we call it the tall poppy syndrome. In other words, if you're up here and you're
Yeah.
succeeding, well, we need to cut you down to our mediocre level.
Okay, gotcha.
I don't subscribe to that. Look, I strive for excellence in my work.